A 9-year-old boy stands on frozen grass and watches his father's people ride away. They take the horses, they take the herds, they take the felt tents, they leave behind a widow, 5 children, and a winter that kills grown men. Every single person riding off that morning expects the boy to be dead before spring. 60 years later, his grandsons rule from the Pacific Ocean to the outskirts of Vienna. Nobody plans for that. And here is the part that still keeps historians awake at night. He did not do it with numbers. His armies were almost always smaller than the armies they annihilated. He had no cities, no treasury, no walls, no written language, no coins. What he had was a single lesson he learned that morning on the grass, and it turned out to be the most dangerous idea of the 13th century. Stay with me, because I am going to show you exactly what that idea was, how it broke China, Persia, and Europe inside one human lifetime, and the one thing that stopped it cold at the precise moment when nothing on earth should have been able to. Dear viewers, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel with the bell. And now, let us continue. The steppe did not forgive mistakes. There were no granaries, no garrisons, no king to appeal to when things went wrong. There was grass, weather, and other men who wanted your grass. A family that lost its protector lost everything, and the neighbors who watched it happen usually helped themselves to whatever was left behind. Into that world, a boy was born, and the story says he came out of the womb gripping a clot of blood in his fist. The shamans called it an omen. His father, a minor chieftain named Yesugei, named him Temujin after an enemy he had just captured on campaign, because on the steppe, a name was a trophy. When Temujin was 9, Yesugei was poisoned by Tatars, who had shared a meal with him on the road. The murder itself was ordinary. What happened next was the education. Temujin's own clan looked at a widow with small children and did the arithmetic. No warriors, no protection, no reason to keep feeding them. So they rode away and left the family standing on open ground with nothing. Not enemies. Kin. They survived on marmots, on roots dug out of half-frozen soil, on fish pulled from ice water with crude bone hooks. And somewhere inside that hunger, something happened that historians still argue about today. Temujin and his younger brother killed their older half-brother Bekter over a stolen fish and a small bird. A boy of roughly 13 removed the only rival for control of a starving household, and his own mother screamed at him that he was a beast who devoured his own family. She was not entirely wrong, but he had also just learned the rule that would organize the rest of his life. Authority does not arrive with birth order. It is taken, and then it is held. Then it got worse. A rival clan captured him and locked his neck into a heavy wooden collar, walking him from camp to camp as a humiliated prisoner. He was beaten. He came close to execution more than once. He escaped one night by lying in a river with only his nostrils above the surface while search parties walked the bank directly above his head. And here is the detail that matters far more than the escape itself. A herder named Sorkin Shira, a man from the enemy camp who had shown him small kindnesses during his captivity, hid him, then handed him a horse, a bow, and food. That man owed him nothing at all. No blood tie, no clan obligation, no debt. He helped because of who Temujin was. That was the second half of the idea. Blood had abandoned him. Loyalty freely given had saved him. So he would build everything he ever built on the second thing, and he would systematically destroy everyone who still relied on the first. He began collecting people. Not through inheritance because he had none, but by paying them properly, protecting them, and promoting them purely on ability. Men started leaving their own clans to ride with a nobody, which on the steppe was close to unthinkable. 2 relationships defined his rise, and both of them ended in blood. The first was Togrul, Khan of the powerful Karaite Confederation and once sworn brother to Temujin's murdered father. Togrul gave the young man legitimacy, troops, and a seat at the table of steppe politics. For years, he was the closest thing to a patron Temujin ever had. The second was Jamukha. And Jamukha is the reason this story is a tragedy rather than simply a conquest. They met as boys. They swore the Anda oath, the bond of chosen brotherhood that the steppe treated as stronger than birth itself. They exchanged gifts, shared a blanket, rode together as allies. Then they became competitors because they wanted the same thing and only one of them could have it. and their split revealed exactly what Temujin was building. Jamukha represented the old world, where noble families ruled by right of ancestry, and the aristocracy divided the spoils among themselves. Temujin represented something the old world found genuinely offensive. He gave plunder to the men who actually fought for it, including commoners, including shepherds, including the sons of nobody. Ambitious young warriors understood immediately which side offered them a future. Jamukha's own followers started deserting him for the man he had once called brother. Temujin's marriage carried the same brutality as everything else. His wife Borte was seized by Merkit raiders shortly after their wedding, a personal humiliation he could not let stand. He gathered allied forces from Togrul and from Jamukha, coordinated a joint attack, and took her back. It was a small campaign by the standards of what came later, but it was his first real exercise in commanding men who were not his own, and he never forgot the lessons about surprise, timing, and alliance. Borte was pregnant when he recovered her. Their eldest son Yochi carried a question mark over his parentage for his entire life, and that quiet doubt would poison the family long after the empire itself had grown to cover half the known world. Then came the wars that made him. He destroyed the Tatars who had poisoned his father. He crushed the Merkits who had taken his wife. He broke the Naimans. And eventually, he faced both Togrul and Jamukha, and he beat them too. The end of Jamukha is one of the strangest moments in the whole story. Captured and delivered by his own men, he reportedly asked to die without his blood being spilled on the ground, which was the honorable execution reserved for the highest nobility. Temujin granted it, then executed the followers who had betrayed their own lord to him. The message was unmistakable. Betray your master, and you die, even when the betrayal helps me. In the year 1206, a great assembly of chieftains called a Kurultai gathered on the open steppe and proclaimed him Genghis Khan, a title usually rendered as universal ruler or oceanic ruler. Every Mongol and Turkic-speaking tribe on the plateau now answered to one man. Generations of endless tribal warfare simply stopped. His very first act as supreme ruler was radical, and it was aimed straight at the thing that had almost killed him as a child. He abolished the clan system. The entire army was reorganized on a strict decimal structure. 10 men formed an arban, 100 formed a jagun, 1,000 formed a mingan, 10,000 formed a tumen. Men from different tribes and different bloodlines were deliberately mixed together inside these units, so that a warrior's identity was no longer his ancestry, but the 9 men standing beside him and the commander above them. Discipline was absolute. If one soldier in a unit of 10 fled the field, the remaining 9 could be executed. Cowardice was no longer a private failure. It killed your comrades. He also issued a body of law known as the Yasa, applied to everyone in his domain. It banned the kidnapping of women. It made livestock theft a capital crime, and it guaranteed religious freedom to every subject, whatever they believed. The same man who erased cities from the map also built a legal framework that in some respects ran centuries ahead of its time. Genghis Khan came from a purely oral culture, and he understood exactly what that cost him. He adopted the Uyghur script to give the Mongol language its first written form. He ordered his sons and grandsons taught to read. He began recruiting literate officials from conquered peoples, Chinese, Persian, and Uyghur alike, to manage an empire that no longer fitted inside one man's memory. He also rebuilt the imperial guard, the Keshig, drawing its members from the sons of his commanders and nobles. It was an honor and a hostage system at the same time. Rebellion against the Khan meant risking your own children serving at his court. Talent now outranked birth at every level. A commoner who proved himself could command 10,000 men, a degree of social mobility almost unimaginable anywhere else in the 13th century world. Then he turned that machine toward the Jin dynasty of northern China, which ruled tens of millions of people and outnumbered the Mongols by every measure that could be counted. The problem was straightforward and serious. Mongols were untouchable on open ground, masters of mounted archery and rapid maneuver, and completely helpless in front of a fortified city wall. So they adapted with characteristic ruthlessness. They captured Chinese engineers and put them to work teaching catapults, battering rams, and the mathematics of encirclement. What followed was genuinely horrifying. Captured civilians were driven forward ahead of advancing troops as living shields, absorbing arrows meant for Mongol soldiers. Cities were sealed off and starved until the trapped population broke, and in several documented cases descended into cannibalism long before the walls themselves were ever breached. In the year 1215, the Jin capital of Zhongdu, standing on the ground where Beijing stands today, finally fell. The city was sacked and burned, and enormous numbers of its residents were killed. Northern China, one of the wealthiest regions on the planet, never recovered its former position under Jin rule. Genghis Khan did not personally supervise every siege. He delegated the grinding work to trusted generals while he held the strategic picture, splitting his forces into separate columns that swept across northern China at once, overwhelming the defense through speed and coordination rather than any single decisive battle. Crucially, the Mongols did not simply destroy everything. They deliberately spared craftsmen, engineers, and administrators wherever they found them, because conquest without competent government collapses under its own weight. Destroy the resistance, preserve the useful. That pattern would repeat for the next 150 years. The Jin court, paralyzed by its own infighting while its cities burned, never managed a unified counterattack. Several Jin generals defected outright, trading their knowledge of fortifications for amnesty, a pattern of internal betrayal that weakened nearly every empire the Mongols ever targeted. Genghis Khan did not always reach for war first. He genuinely wanted trade with the Khwarezmian Empire, which stretched across Persia and Central Asia, and he sent a caravan of roughly 500 merchants west to open commercial relations. The governor of the border city of Otrar accused them of espionage, seized their goods, and had every one of them executed. When Genghis Khan sent envoys demanding an explanation, the Khwarezmian Shah had the senior envoy killed and shaved the beards of the others before sending them home in deliberate humiliation. That insult launched one of the most destructive campaigns in recorded history. Genghis Khan personally led an army of more than 100,000 men across icy mountain passes to erase the Khwarezmian Empire from the map. Bukhara and Samarkand, glittering centers of learning and trade, were gutted. Enormous numbers of people were killed, and ancient irrigation systems that had taken 1,000 years to build were deliberately wrecked, turning farmland back into desert across large stretches of Central Asia. The governor of Otrar, according to the surviving accounts, was executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. A punishment designed to match the exact shape of his greed. The chroniclers of the period give casualty figures that modern historians treat with caution, since medieval writers routinely inflated numbers for effect. But even the skeptical estimates describe a catastrophe. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years as centers of poetry, mathematics, and astronomy were reduced to rubble within days of the army's arrival. Genghis Khan personally interrogated captured scholars and engineers before deciding their fate, sparing those whose knowledge could serve him. Persian artisans, doctors, and astronomers were relocated eastward, where their expertise would later drive real scientific and administrative advances under his successors. This campaign revealed a chilling new dimension to Mongol strategy. Terror was not revenge. Terror was infrastructure. By making certain that survivors fled westward carrying stories, Genghis Khan ensured the next city in his path was already half-beaten before a single horseman appeared on its horizon. That weapon worked because of how the army was actually built. The deadliest thing in the Mongol arsenal was not a sword or a siege engine. It was the composite recurve bow, layered from horn, wood, and sinew, capable of killing at ranges European and Chinese archers could not match, and lethal against armor at well over 100 meters. Every horseman traveled with 3 or 4 spare mounts, switching between them to keep the animals fresh. A Mongol army could sustain marches of 50 or 60 kilometers a day for weeks and push far beyond that when speed mattered, appearing where no enemy believed an army could possibly be. When supplies ran out, warriors opened a small vein in a horse's neck and drank the blood, often mixed with fermented mare's milk, without dismounting or making camp. Their signature tactic was the feigned retreat. Riders would break formation and flee in apparent panic, drawing enemy cavalry out of its defensive lines, then wheel back in perfect coordination, and surround the scattered pursuers from every direction at once. They also used a maneuver called the talugma, in which separate columns advanced across a wide front, looking to enemy scouts like disorganized raiding parties, only to converge at a single predetermined point with devastating precision. Intelligence work was equally sophisticated and consistently underrated. Before any major campaign, scouts and merchant informants mapped enemy roads, water sources, and city defenses, sometimes over years rather than months. Genghis Khan studied those reports with the intensity a modern commander gives to satellite imagery, refusing to commit until he understood exactly where his opponent was weak. Even their peacetime training was war training. Thousands of riders would form a circle many kilometers across and slowly drive wild game toward a central killing ground, a hunt that doubled as a full-scale rehearsal for encircling an army. Each warrior carried spare clothing, cooking pots, fishing line, and repair tools, so armies could operate independently for months without the slow, vulnerable supply trains that crippled everyone else. And Mongol commanders absorbed foreign technology without hesitation, taking Chinese gunpowder weapons, Persian siege engineers, and later Korean shipbuilding, because winning mattered more than tradition. After Central Asia, the aging conqueror turned back toward China to punish the kingdom of Xia, which had broken its alliance by refusing to send promised troops. During that campaign, now in his 60s, he suffered a serious fall from his horse and internal injuries that would have ended any lesser man. He refused to stop and commanded the war until his last breath. Genghis Khan died in August of the year 1227, and the exact circumstances are still debated. His final order was that news of his death be kept secret until Xia had been completely destroyed, so that no enemy could take comfort from it. According to tradition, his escort killed everyone they encountered along the funeral route to the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun, leaving no witnesses. 1,000 horses were driven across the burial ground to flatten it, and a river was said to have been diverted over the grave. To this day, despite satellite surveys and ground-penetrating radar, the tomb has never been found. In roughly 2 decades, he had overseen the conquest of more territory than any individual in human history, an empire running from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian, containing dozens of languages, religions, and cultures under one command. He divided it among his sons. Yoki, whose parentage had never stopped being whispered about, received the western lands, though he died before his father did, and the inheritance passed to his own children. Chagatai took Central Asia. Ogadai, chosen as successor, took authority over the imperial center. Tolui, the youngest, kept the Mongol homeland and the bulk of his father's personal army. The arrangement was meant to prevent a succession war. Instead, it planted the exact rivalries that would eventually tear the empire apart from the inside. Ogadai was chosen not because he was the fiercest of the brothers, but because he was the best negotiator, the one most capable of holding a quarreling family together. He built the first permanent Mongol capital at Karakoram, turning a purely nomadic empire into something with an address. Then he sent his armies west, under the nominal command of Batu, son of Jochi, with the brilliant General Subutai directing the campaign in the field. They turned the Russian winter into a weapon nobody had thought to use. Frozen rivers became highways, letting fast cavalry strike cities across terrain that was impassable swamp in any other season. Kiev was stormed and burned in the year 1240. Then they crossed into Poland and Hungary and destroyed 2 European armies within 2 days of each other. At Legnica, a combined force of Polish knights and crusading orders was annihilated. European heavy cavalry, slow and rigid, could not answer an enemy that shot arrows at full gallop while retreating, then turned and charged within minutes. 2 days later, and hundreds of kilometers away, at Mohi in Hungary, an even larger army was encircled and slaughtered. King Bela IV escaped with his life and almost nothing else. What genuinely stunned European observers was not the defeat, but the timing. 2 armies operating a vast distance apart had coordinated their strikes within days, using flag signals, relay riders, and smoke, with no technology Europe recognized as capable of it. European chroniclers could not even name their attackers correctly, confusing the Mongols with Tartarus, the classical underworld, which is where the enduring word Tatar comes from. Subutai himself remains one of the most underrated commanders in world history. Born a commoner, the son of a blacksmith, he rose entirely on merit and led campaigns across a wider stretch of the earth than any general before or since. By the end of the year, 1241, Mongol scouts were within reach of Vienna. Western Europe had no answer. Then a rider arrived from the east. Ogedei was dead, reportedly from years of heavy drinking, and the princes turned back toward Mongolia. Popular accounts say Mongol law required every commander to return for the assembly that chose a new Khan. Historians now treat that as only part of the picture, and probably not the largest part. Batu never actually attended the Kurultai. Modern research points to exhausted pasture on the Hungarian plain, real casualties, stretched supply lines, and a bitter rivalry between Batu and Ogedei's heirs that made the succession worth more than another campaigning season. Whatever the reason, the armies left, and Western Europe survived by an accident of timing. The withdrawal exposed something structural. Even at the height of its power, this empire's internal politics outranked any foreign conquest, however close to victory. Ogedei's death opened roughly 5 years of paralysis while branches of the family fought over the succession. His son Guyuk eventually took the title and died soon after under circumstances still unexplained. Power then passed away from Ogedei's line entirely to the descendants of Tolui. In the year 1251, Mongke was elected Great Khan, and he moved immediately. He purged his rivals, executing high-ranking nobles until no challenge remained. He ordered an investigation into regional governors who had grown corrupt during the years of weak central authority, and executed those found guilty of abusing conquered populations, which was brutal and also genuinely improved life for millions of ordinary subjects. He commissioned an empire-wide census, an extraordinary undertaking for the period, allowing accurate assessment of taxation and manpower from the Pacific to the borders of Europe. Half a century earlier, this had been a loose tribal confederation. Now it counted its people. Then he did something almost nobody in history has attempted. He opened 2 full-scale wars at once. His brother Hulagu was sent west against the Islamic heartlands. His brother Kublai was sent to finish the conquest of southern China. Hulagu's target was Baghdad, then one of the greatest centers of learning on earth. On the way, he eliminated the Order of the Assassins, taking their mountain strongholds and forcing the surrender of Alamut in the year 1256. In 1258, he demanded the Caliph of Baghdad surrender. The Caliph refused, trusting his walls and his conviction that divine protection would hold. The Mongols breached the walls and killed somewhere between 80,000 and 200,000 people over a few days. Libraries burned. The scale of the cultural loss was real and permanent, and it ended the Abbasid Caliphate that had stood for 5 centuries as a beacon of mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. But the story that the Mongols destroyed the House of Wisdom is a modern myth. That institution had ceased to exist generations earlier. And there is a stranger truth underneath. Hulagu deliberately spared scholars. The Persian polymath Nasir al-Din al-Tusi entered his service, and out of that came the great observatory at Mariga, whose astronomical tables would later reach Europe and influence Copernicus himself. To avoid spilling royal blood on the ground, which Mongol belief forbade, the captured caliph was rolled inside a carpet and trampled to death by horses. Hulagu's wife, a devout Christian, urged restraint toward the city's Christian population, who were largely spared as a result, a reminder that the Mongol royal family contained Christians, Buddhists, and shamanists whose beliefs genuinely shaped policy at the highest level. Hulagu founded the Ilkhanate across Persia, and within 2 generations that violently born state was patronizing a real revival of Persian art, astronomy, and history. Devastation followed by cultural flowering became a recurring Mongol pattern. Then, as Hulagu prepared to invade Egypt, word arrived that Mongke had died on campaign in China. Again, the succession pulled the army home. Hulagu withdrew most of his forces, leaving roughly 10,000 men to hold the entire Middle Eastern frontier. The Mamluks of Egypt, former slave soldiers trained in steppe warfare themselves, recognized the opportunity instantly. At Ain Jalut, in the year 1260, they used the Mongols' own feigned retreat against them, drew the smaller force into a trap, and destroyed it. It was the first Mongol defeat that could never be avenged, and it permanently stopped expansion toward Africa. The Mamluks had won by studying their enemy until they could fight like him. Hulagu wanted revenge and never got it, because he was now at war with his own cousin Berka, Khan of the Golden Horde, who had converted to Islam. Mongol was fighting Mongol. The unified empire was already gone in everything but name. Kublai's rise sealed it. He fought a 4-year civil war against his own brother Arig Bokeh for the title of Great Khan, and although he won, the other Khanates never truly accepted him again. 4 independent states now existed where one empire had been. Southern China resisted for decades because rivers, rice paddies, and forests neutralized everything cavalry did well. So Kublai rebuilt the war. He constructed a navy from nothing and imported Persian engineers to build enormous counterweight trebuchets that finally cracked the fortress cities. He proclaimed the Yuan dynasty in 1271, and the Song finally collapsed in 1279. Kublai became the first foreign-born ruler to control all of China, moved his capital to Beijing, and styled himself a Chinese emperor. He restored the Grand Canal, expanded the postal relay system, and promoted paper currency, which astonished European visitors because nothing like it existed at home. He kept a summer capital at Chengdu, remembered in English poetry as Xanadu, where he could still hunt on horseback when court ritual became suffocating. But he also formalized a hierarchy placing Mongols and foreign allies above native Chinese in law, taxation, and office. It held control in the short term and guaranteed resentment that outlived the dynasty. Then he overreached. Japan refused his demand for submission and beheaded his envoys. His first invasion in 1274 failed amid heavy losses and supply problems. In 1281, he assembled roughly 4,000 ships and 140,000 men, the largest naval invasion attempted anywhere on Earth to that date. A typhoon destroyed most of it. The Japanese called the storm kamikaze, the divine wind, and the myth of Mongol invincibility drowned with the fleet. What the Mongols built between the wars, though, outlasted all of it. Under the peace historians call the Pax Mongolica, they controlled the whole length of the Silk Road and garrisoned it, so merchants could travel from Europe to East Asia in relative safety for the first time in centuries. Their relay network, the YAM, with stations roughly every 40 kilometers, could move urgent messages around 300 kilometers in a day. Marco Polo traveled that network and served years at Kublai's court. Gunpowder and paper money moved west. Arab mathematics and astronomy moved east. Clergy of every faith were exempted from taxation and argued freely at court. Maps in Venice and Genoa suddenly showed Central Asia and China with real detail. Historians often call this the first age of globalization, and the same roads killed it. Plague traveled the trade routes into Europe, and the Black Death emptied cities on both ends of the world. In the 1350s, drought, catastrophic flooding on the Yellow River, and rampant official corruption ignited the Red Turban Rebellion. In the year 1368, a former peasant named Zhu Yuanzhang drove the Mongols out of Beijing and founded the Ming dynasty. He had been orphaned by famine and plague and had begged for food as a wandering monk before rising through sheer cunning. An abandoned boy at the bottom of the world had ended what an abandoned boy at the bottom of the world had begun. The retreat was not a clean collapse. The Yuan court fled north and ruled a reduced steppe kingdom for decades, still calling itself legitimate. The Golden Horde slowly lost its grip on the Russian principalities as Moscow grew strong. The Ilkhanate fractured into smaller dynasties. The Chagatai lands eventually gave rise to the empire of Timur, who could never claim descent from Genghis Khan, and spent his life ruling through puppet khans and marrying into the bloodline to borrow its authority. That is how much the name was still worth. Descendants ruled successor states for centuries, including the Crimean Khanate and the Mughal Empire of India. Genetic studies suggest a striking number of men across Asia carry a Y chromosome lineage that may trace back to his family, though nobody has ever tested his remains because nobody has ever found them, which is the ending he chose. Somewhere under unmarked ground on a mountain in Mongolia lies a man whose own clan once left him on the grass to starve, and who answered by building a connected world out of the single idea they taught him that morning. Loyalty is not inherited, it is earned. It is. And whoever understands that first can take everything. The script is finished. That last part closed the arc and landed inside the word range, so there's nothing further to write without padding it out. If you want, I can put together the asset package for it. Stock footage queries, nano banana image prompts, character sheets for Temujin, Subutai, Kublai, and Hulagu, lower third title cards, and the YouTube metadata. Just say which piece you want first.